The bottle of whiskey, a second one, was now in constant demand by all present, excepting Catherine, who felt just as good on nothing at all. Tom rang for the janitor and sent him for some celebrated sandwiches, which were a complete supper in themselves. I wanted to get out and walk southward towards the park through the soft twilight, but each time I tried to go, I became entangled in some wild, strident argument, which pulled me back, as if by ropes, into my chair. Yet high over the city, our line of yellow windows must have contributed their share of human secrecy to the casual watch in the darkening streets. And I was him too, looking up and wondering. I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. This passage is one that's always struck me when I've read The Great Gatsby, particularly its parting lines about being within and without. It describes a very relatable state, and, to use a somewhat pretentious term, captures the liminal nature of existence. One aspect of this paragraph had never stood out to me until recently, though. Tom rang for the janitor and sent him for some celebrated sandwiches, which were a complete supper in themselves. On the one hand, why is a janitor getting you sandwiches? I would have to assume that at the time the word describes a bit of a broader role. On the other hand, what were the sandwiches Nick refers to here? It occurs to me that the second clause would imply that traditionally the type of sandwich he'd refer to would be something like tea sandwiches. So this was likely rather a sandwich as we would typically refer to today, one that is the main portion of your meal. That doesn't exactly narrow things down for us though, does it? So truth be told, we need to take a little bit of a leap. And yeah, alright, I'm taking a bit of a leap. You're just coming along with me if you're still watching. I tend to think Nick is referring to a club sandwich because, at least based on the sandwiches I'm aware of during that period, the club sandwich seems pretty perfect in terms of popularity and size. And I really don't think it's the celebration sandwich that I found in a Google search, which just looks atrocious. Or at least I hope it's not that. So let's just go with the club sandwich. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can you make a whole video out of putting together a sandwich? Well, for one thing, there's a lot of people who don't seem to know how to make a sandwich at all. For another, they're going to hate this video because we're going to make our own bread, our own sliced chicken, and our own mayonnaise. Let's get into it and start with the bread. You may remember my sandwich bread video from a while back. We're making that one, but we'll go through the process quicker since you can just go watch that whole video if you need. So, quickly, mix together 170 grams of lukewarm water, 130 grams of warmed milk, and 8 grams of active dry yeast. Combine the dry ingredients in a stand mixer with the dough hook attached. 425 grams of bread flour, 8 grams of salt, and 20 grams of sugar. Mix together the wet and dry. Then, 1 tablespoon at a time, add in 3 tablespoons of butter total with the mixer on low. You'll want to wait for each piece of butter to be incorporated until you move on to the next one. You may need to smear the butter into the dough by hand, as I'm doing here. Then remove the dough from the bowl and form into a top ball. Grease the bowl you were mixing in, place the top ball back in, and cover with plastic wrap. Let this sit for about an hour and a half to 2 hours or until doubled in size. Then remove the plastic wrap and punch down the dough. Place the dough on a lightly floured surface. Now from left to right, roll the dough out to the width of the loaf pan and then around double that in length or until the height is around 1/2 inch thick. Then by hand, roll the dough back towards yourself into a spiraled roll. Place into a loaf pan and cover with a damp towel and let rise 1 hour or until it grows slightly over the top of the loaf pan. Finally, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and then bake for 30 to 40 minutes or until the internal temp reaches 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Once baked, remove the bread from the loaf pan and place on a rack and let cool before slicing. If you're lucky like me, your loaf will also be misshapen this time around. Now that we've got our bread, let's talk turkey. Okay, it's actually chicken. I mean, you could use turkey, but I'm doing chicken because that's what was actually on the original club sandwich. The method I'm using is Meat Dad's recipe from Instagram, and if you know him, you're aware of how much he yelled at you. We're going to preheat the oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, then take some chicken breasts and dress them up. Think simple, a quick spritz of olive oil, salt, pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, thyme, oregano, or whatever you want that makes sense on a club sandwich. Then place them into an 8x8 tray, top with a little parchment paper and cover with foil. Mine took about 35 to 40 minutes in the oven to reach 160 degrees, which is perfectly fine as long as you were sure that the chicken was held at that temperature for at least 15 seconds. It's essentially the exact equivalent of going to 165 in terms of safety, but don't quote me on that. Thermworks has a really good article about that in their blog that I'll link in the description of this video, and specifically I should note that that temperature and time combination is only applicable to lean white meat. After the breasts are cooked, place them on a cooling rack and throw them in the fridge overnight. Unlike Meat Dad, I do not have a deli slicer and I'm probably never going to get one. Although with the way prices for sliced meat are going, maybe I will, because it's literally fucking insane. So I tried to use a mandolin, which as you can see did not work, so don't bother with that. If you're in the same boat as me, which I would suspect that 99% of people are, that is people that do not own deli slicers, just use a sharp knife, in my case a chef's knife, and make the thinnest possible slices you can muster. Now let's move on to our last homemade ingredient, the mayo. This one is from Serious Eats and it couldn't be simpler as long as you have an immersion blender. If you don't, you just need some strong biceps and a whisk and a different recipe, because I'm not going to walk you through how to do that part because I didn't do it and I'm never going to do it because I do have an immersion blender. All you need to do is grab a container that's just wider than the immersion blender and crack in an egg, a teaspoon of Dijon mustard, a tablespoon of lemon juice, 1 garlic clove, and a pinch of salt. Then pour in a cup of neutral oil. I'm using grapeseed oil here, but canola or vegetable works as well. And place in your immersion blender and, well, blend. Once you see it start to look mayo-y, pull the blender up and work it around to get it homogeneous. Check for salt, acid, and add any additional seasoning you want to it. I'm basically just adding pepper and a little more salt. You may want to thin it out to your preferred consistency with some water. I'll admit though that I added a little too much to mine and it was thinner than I preferred. It did thicken up a little bit more in the fridge, but not to what I would have liked. So don't be like me and make that mistake. Your mayo should keep for about 2 weeks in the fridge. Now we have reached our final destination, haven't we? It is time to assemble our masterpiece. Don't worry, a club sandwich is basically just a chicken sandwich topped with a BLT. So let's assemble. Start by cooking up 4 pieces of bacon and then buttering and toasting 3 slices of bread in the same pan. Just be sure to wipe out most of the bacon grease before toasting or your bread will get oily, which you don't want. Next, we build. Slather on a nice layer of mayonnaise as your foundation, then top with your sliced chicken. Grab your second slice, add mayo to both sides, and then begin your BLT. First, add all your bacon, then a few slices of tomato that you've salted and peppered. Ideally only make this sandwich in the summer when tomatoes are actually fresh. Top with a good amount of romaine or iceberg lettuce. Then add your final slice of toasted bread on top with a little more mayonnaise and cut your club sandwich into quarters and be ready with some toothpicks to hold everything together. Honestly, if I wasn't making a video though, I don't think I would cut this into the traditional quarters, but that's up to you. And that's it. We've got ourselves a club sandwich. Probably had one before, or all of the ingredients that it's comprised of, so I don't think that I need to do too much describing for you. Is it certainly these celebrated sandwiches they ate in the Great Gatsby? No, but it's definitely a complete supper in itself.